Welcome back to Revenge Red. My name is Diana Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until the day my father called me, I thought buying my first house would finally be the moment my life stopped feeling borrowed. I had just closed on a narrow brick row home in Philadelphia after 12 years of overtime, skipped vacations, and saying no to almost everything that wasn't survival. I wasn't even fully moved in yet. Half my boxes were still taped shut, my dishes were stacked on the floor, and I was sleeping on an air mattress because I wanted to save up before buying real furniture. That morning, I was standing in the kitchen measuring a wall for bookshelves when my phone lit up. My father didn't say hello. He said, "You need to come get your things. Your sister needs the house more than you do." I laughed at first because the sentence was so outrageous it didn't sound real. Then my mother got on speaker and said, "Calm as rain. This is your sister's home now, Diana. Be mature about it." In the background, I heard children running, cabinet doors opening, and then my sister's voice, light and smug and completely at home in a place she had never paid for. "You're not welcome here, so don't make this ugly." That was the moment my stomach dropped so hard I had to grab the counter. They weren't asking. They had already moved in. My father had used the emergency key I'd given him while I was at work, and my entire future had been handed over like a family favor. 2 days later, they threw a housewarming party in my home and told people I had never helped anyone. They thought they had erased me. What they forgot, what none of them bothered to check, was whose name was on the deed. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. For 3 straight days, I didn't cry. I know that sounds strange, but I was too stunned to cry. I went to work at the museum, checked inventory on 17th century maps, signed transfer forms for a loan shipment from New York, answered emails, and smiled at donors, while my brain kept replaying that sentence, "This is your sister's home, now." My job as a museum registrar is basically documentation, chain of custody, and proof. I track what belongs to whom, where it came from, where it goes, and what happens if someone touches something they had no right to touch. I handled priceless objects with more legal protection than my own family thought I deserved. On the 4th night, I drove past the house after sunset. My porch light was on. Not my old apartment's porch light. My porch light. I saw a stroller by the front step, little sneakers lined up by the doorway, and a wreath on the door I had not bought. A laugh floated through the screen window, and I recognized it immediately. Vanessa, my golden sister. The one who always landed softly, no matter whose back she stepped on. That same night, I opened a storage bin in my apartment and found a hard drive full of digitized family videos I'd been meaning to organize. I wasn't looking for childhood pain. I was looking for proof that I wasn't crazy. I clicked one file, then another, then another. At 8 years old, I was holding a spelling bee trophy while my mother adjusted Vanessa's pageant sash and told the camera to zoom in on the pretty one. At 14, I was in the background of a Christmas video wrapping presents, while my father filmed Vanessa opening a used car they'd sacrificed everything to buy. At 22, during my college graduation dinner, my mother lifted her glass and somehow turned the toast into a speech about Vanessa finding herself. It wasn't one dramatic betrayal. It was 100 little edits, repeated until I became the family workhorse and she became the family story. That was when I finally said their names out loud to the empty room like I was reading a charge sheet. Robert Brooks, Elaine Brooks, Vanessa Brooks. And once I said them like that, something inside me cooled off. I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like a records manager. I pulled up the settlement statement from my closing. Sole owner, Diana Brooks. I checked the mortgage. Sole borrower, Diana Brooks. Home insurance, utilities, title, tax registration, all mine. Then I checked the doorbell camera app I had installed but barely used. The footage was still there. My father unlocking the door. My mother carrying in garment bags. Vanessa directing movers while holding a latte. Her husband, Grant, bringing in framed photos. One of my boxes placed on the sidewalk like trash. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had documented their own trespass for me in high definition. The next slap came on social media. Vanessa had posted a smiling family photo in my living room with the caption, "Finally in our forever home. Grateful for the people who actually show up." My mother commented with heart emojis. My father wrote, "Proud of you, kiddo." Dozens of strangers congratulated them. One woman wrote, "So happy your family helped you get back on your feet." Another wrote, "Love seeing good people rewarded." I stared at that screen so long my eyes started watering, not because it hurt, but because I understood the strategy. They weren't just taking my house. They were writing me out in public before I could speak. Then the invitation arrived. Not to me, of course. A coworker of my mother's had shared Vanessa's open house post, and there it was. "Come celebrate our new beginning this Saturday." Our new beginning. In my house. That was the exact moment the fog lifted. I called a property attorney named Caleb Mercer the next morning, and before I even finished explaining, he said, "Do not warn them yet. Gather every document, save every post, download every video. Let them keep talking." So I did. I made folders, screenshots, timelines, copies of the deed, utility confirmations, insurance documents, ring footage, text messages, even a photo of the lockbox code I had once trusted my father with. They thought I was the invisible daughter again. But invisibility can be useful when the people underestimating you are too arrogant to hide the evidence. By the end of that week, I had a legal file thick enough to make my hands ache. By the end of the next, I was ready to walk into my own house and let them perform their lies one last time. The housewarming party was on a Saturday at 4. I arrived at 4:20, because timing matters when people are busy admiring themselves. Cars lined both sides of the block. I recognized neighbors I hadn't met yet, church friends of my mother's, 2 of my father's golfing buddies, and at least a dozen strangers holding paper plates and red plastic cups in a home I still hadn't gotten to live in. Through the open front window, I could hear Vanessa telling someone the place had needed a woman's touch, which was bold considering she'd been in it for less than 2 weeks and had already painted over the hallway trim I'd spent a month restoring. I stood on the sidewalk for maybe 10 seconds, just breathing. Not because I was scared, because anger, if you don't shape it properly, makes you sloppy. And I had not come there to be messy. I had come there to be unforgettable. Inside, the smell hit me first. Grilled meat, artificial vanilla candles, and some overpowering floral room spray Vanessa always used when she wanted things to feel expensive. My mother saw me first and nearly dropped her drink. My father stiffened. Vanessa turned slowly, one hand still resting on the granite edge of my kitchen island, and smiled like I was a nuisance she'd expected eventually. "Well," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Look who decided to stop by after all." Conversation stumbled and thinned out. I could feel people listening without looking. Vanessa kept going. "You know, it's funny. She never lifted a finger while we were struggling, but now suddenly she wants attention." A few nervous chuckles. My mother added, "Diana, this really isn't the time." My father took the crueler route. "Don't start something in front of guests." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Actually," I said, "this is exactly the right time." Then I reached into my bag and laid 3 things on the dining table in front of everyone: a copy of the deed, a printed still shot from my doorbell camera of my father entering with the emergency key, and a notice from Caleb's office addressed to all 4 occupants. The room got quiet in a way I can only describe as surgical. Vanessa stared at the paperwork, then laughed too fast. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Dad said you were fine with us staying here." My father snapped. "We're family." She wasn't using it yet. That was when I looked around at all those guests and said, clearly enough for the back of the room to hear, "Since everyone is here celebrating, let me save you from being used as witnesses to a lie. I am the sole legal owner of this property. No one in this house has a lease, permission, or any ownership interest." They entered using a key I gave for emergencies and moved in while I was at work. My mother tried to grab the papers. I moved them away. Vanessa's smile cracked. "You are seriously doing this right now?" she hissed. "In front of everybody?" I looked her dead in the eye. "You already did it in front of everybody. Online. In my house." Then Caleb, who had told me he'd stay nearby if I wanted a witness, stepped through the front door after I texted him a single word. "Now." He introduced himself, handed over the formal demand for immediate surrender of the property, and explained, in the tone of a man who had repeated the law to entitled people many times before, that any further occupancy, property damage, or interference with access would increase their liability. One of my father's friends quietly set down his plate and left, then another, and another. You could practically hear the party unraveling. Vanessa, of course, went for performance. "This is cruel," she said, tears arriving on schedule. "You know we needed help." Her husband, Grant, who had been mostly silent until then, asked the question that changed the whole room. "Wait, you told me your parents co-own this place." Vanessa froze. My father started talking over him. My mother began crying. Grant looked at the deed, then at me, then back at his wife, like a man suddenly realizing his marriage had been built on selective facts. "Did you lie to me?" he asked. Vanessa snapped. "I did what I had to do for our kids." That line might have worked on my parents. It did not work on me. "No," I said. "You did what was easiest because everyone in this family trained you to believe my work, my money, and my future were community property. I would love to tell you that was the moment they surrendered. It wasn't. People like that rarely stop at shame. They pivot to blame. My father called me selfish. My mother said I was humiliating them." Vanessa told the remaining guests I had always hated her, but the magic was gone. The lie had been punctured, and once air starts leaking out of a family myth, everyone hears the hiss. Before I left, I walked through each room slowly because I wanted them to feel what I felt, that none of this was theirs. In the back bedroom, one of my labeled moving boxes had been opened and rifled through. In the bathroom, my towels were hanging by the sink like borrowed skin. In the living room, Vanessa had covered the mantel with family photos that didn't include me. I took one of those frames down, set it face first on the table, and said, "You have been living inside the consequences of underestimating me. You just don't know the full bill yet." Then I left. The next month was war by paperwork, and I was better built for it than they were. Vanessa assumed I would get emotional and back down. My parents assumed I would cave for the sake of family peace. What they failed to understand was that I had spent my adult life learning how to preserve records so that truth could outlast ego. I went back through every account connected to the house: utility spikes, unauthorized mailing address changes, delivery receipts, neighbors' messages, a contractor invoice for an illegal wall removal Vanessa had bragged about on Instagram, a tax notice tied to a small online boutique she had registered using my address without permission. That one made Caleb actually smile. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is where selfish becomes stupid." Around that time, my best friend Tessa Reed became the only person who could get me to eat a full meal. Tessa was an exhibition designer at the museum, smart, funny, and incapable of pretending a bad situation was fine. She had known me long enough to understand that when I go quiet, I'm usually building something. One night, As we sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by bankers' boxes and legal tabs, she said, "You know what makes this worse? It isn't just that they took the house, it's that they were sure you would absorb it." She was right. The house was the event. The assumption behind it was the real wound. My role had always been to produce, rescue, organize, forgive, and then disappear so Vanessa could sparkle in the center of the frame. So I made a decision that had nothing and everything to do with revenge. I stopped waiting for the museum to define my future. For years, I had quietly built expertise in provenance research, restoration logistics, and collection planning. Tessa pushed me to package that knowledge into private consulting for small galleries and historical societies that couldn't afford full-time registrars. "You already know how to prove what belongs to who," she said. "Apparently, that's your superpower." Within 6 weeks, I had 2 side clients, then 3. I was working longer hours than ever, but for the first time, the exhaustion felt directional. Every invoice I sent, every contract I signed, every client who introduced me as the one who saves a project from chaos, stitched me back together. Meanwhile, chaos was blooming nicely at my house. Because yes, it was still my house, no matter who was misusing it. My father ignored the demand letter. Vanessa posted passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and toxic relatives. My mother called twice, left teary voicemails, and somehow never apologized. Grant, though, had changed. He called Caleb's office to request copies of the public record documents. That told me everything. He was checking whether he had been deceived, and he had. Then a neighbor emailed me after noticing a dumpster out front. Vanessa had started updating the place to make it feel more like hers. New backsplash, removed shelving, painted brick. One photo showed workers hauling out the original built-ins from the study, the ones that had been one of the reasons I bought the house in the first place. I felt so angry my hands shook. Then I did something different. I documented the damage, assigned estimates, and added another category to the complaint. Destruction is easier to punish when you itemize it. The legal action moved faster once we filed for wrongful occupancy, property damage, unauthorized business use of the address, and reimbursement for carrying costs. Caleb also sent a preservation notice warning them not to delete social posts, texts, or financial records related to the property. That spooked my father enough to call me directly. His voice had none of its old authority left. "This has gone too far," he said. "You're making strangers think we're criminals." I remember answering without any heat at all. "No, Dad, your behavior is doing that. I'm just making it visible." He hung up. 2 days later, Vanessa made the mistake that turned a strong case into a devastating one. She sold my original foyer mirror, an antique I had inherited from my grandmother, through an online marketplace. The buyer, bless him, turned out to be a local history teacher who recognized me from the museum website and emailed to ask if I was downsizing. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the photo. Caleb's response was immediate: conversion claim, amended complaint, emergency motion. If you've never watched a family narrative collapse under documentation, it's less dramatic than people imagine. It doesn't happen in one explosion. It happens in layers. First, they lose confidence, then they lose consistency. Then they start contradicting each other. My mother told one story, my father another, Vanessa a third. Grant stopped appearing in the background of her posts. Church friends stopped commenting, and by the time fall arrived, I had built something stronger than anger. I had leverage. The funny thing about being the daughter everyone overlooks is that you learn how to survive without applause. The dangerous thing is that when you finally stop begging to be seen, people often realize too late that you were the structural beam holding their illusions up. By October, my consulting work had grown enough that the museum invited me to curate a small public program on restoration ethics and the hidden labor behind preserving history. Tessa helped me turn it into something bigger. A polished evening event with donors, local press, and a showcase of recovered objects paired with stories about ownership, care, and misattribution. The theme wasn't subtle, and I didn't care. For once, I wanted a room built around truth. We called the event What Survives. The title fit more than the exhibit. It fit me. The night of the opening, I wore a navy dress, pinned my hair back, and stood under gallery lights feeling steadier than I had in months. The room was full by 6:30. Reporters from 2 local arts outlets were there. So were board members, independent curators, and several new consulting contacts. People asked smart questions. They listened. They took notes. They said my work gave them a new respect for the invisible systems that protect what matters. I wish I could explain what that felt like after a lifetime of being treated like support staff in my own family. Then Tessa, who had been near the entrance managing the flow, went very still. I followed her gaze and saw the last people I wanted in that room: Elaine, Vanessa, and Grant. Grant looked exhausted. Elaine looked nervous. Vanessa looked like she had dressed for battle. She crossed the gallery floor with that same bright, brittle confidence she used when she was about to do something reckless. "Wow," she said, looking around as if she were granting approval. "This is cute. I didn't realize family drama could turn into a brand." A few guests pretended not to hear. Others absolutely heard. I could feel the atmosphere shift, waiting. Tessa moved closer, but I gave her a tiny shake of the head. Let her talk, I thought. Liars are most useful when they feel theatrical. Vanessa took another step and raised her voice. "You know, it's funny she acts so principled now. Half her inspiration came from living in our house and watching me rebuild a home for my children. There it was. Not enough that she had trespassed, lied, and damaged my property. She had to colonize the narrative, too." I smiled. Not warmly, but with recognition. "Our house?" I said into the microphone I had been using for remarks. Conversations around the room stilled. "That's interesting phrasing, Vanessa." Then I nodded to Tessa, who handed me a folder. No dramatic slideshow this time. I didn't need spectacle. I needed precision. "Since you chose a public setting," I continued, "let's be exact. The property is legally mine. You were served notice. You used my address for your business without consent. You sold an inherited item that did not belong to you. And last week, your attorney requested a settlement discussion after seeing the amended damages." A visible ripple moved through the room. Grant closed his eyes. Elaine whispered, "Diana, please." Vanessa tried outrage. "You are obsessed with humiliating me?" she snapped. "You've always been jealous." That line might once have landed because it was the family default, but timing is everything, and what she said next finished her. "You never cared about that house until I made it look like something." A reporter actually lowered her pen and stared. Tessa gave me the smallest look that said, "She did not just say that out loud." I answered calmly, "I restored that house before you ever stepped inside it. I saved for it. I bought it. I insured it. I paid every tax bill on it. You decorated over my work and called it destiny." Then Grant spoke, not to me, but to the room, voice flat with humiliation. "She told me her parents owned it jointly and Diana had agreed. None of that was true. If you've ever heard a lie die in public, that was the sound." Vanessa burst into tears again, but this time nobody rushed to comfort her. Elaine reached for her. Vanessa yanked away. Grant stepped back altogether. A museum trustee quietly asked security to stand nearby, though nothing physical happened. The real damage was social, and everybody knew it. The story no longer belonged to the golden daughter with the wounded smile. It belonged to the documents, the witnesses, the contradictions, and the man she had misled into moving his children into a lawsuit. She fled first. Elaine followed, Grant remained long enough to say very softly, "I'm sorry," before walking out a different door. Afterward, the event went on, and that was perhaps the most satisfying part. Not the exposure itself, but the fact that their chaos no longer dictated the whole room. People asked if I was okay. I said yes, because for the first time it was true. A donor from a preservation foundation approached me near closing and said, "You have a rare gift for making facts impossible to ignore." She offered to introduce me to 2 institutions looking for outside consultants. On the ride home, Tessa laughed so hard she had to pull over. "She tried to hijack a professional event," she said, wiping her eyes, "and instead, she gave your career a testimonial." But beneath the humor was something harder and cleaner. Vanessa had always relied on intimacy to keep me quiet. Once the truth moved into public space, where roles mattered less than records, she had nothing left but performance. And performance, without credibility, is just noise in expensive shoes. 3 weeks after the exhibit, Caleb called with the update I'd been waiting for. The court had granted possession and set the timeline for enforcement if the property wasn't vacated voluntarily. They also ordered preservation of remaining property contents, which meant no more sneaky sales, no more misplaced heirlooms, no more pretending damage had been there before. Vanessa's side wanted settlement. My father wanted a family conversation. My mother wanted prayer. I wanted keys, repairs, reimbursement, and distance. Grant, I later learned, had moved into a short-term rental with the kids while he decided what to do next. He was done taking Vanessa's version of events on faith. The golden child, it turned out, shined brightest only when everyone else supplied the electricity. Then came the text from Vanessa. "Can we please just meet? No lawyers, no drama, just family." I stared at it for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because the audacity fascinated me. No lawyers? After trespassing, fraud-adjacent address misuse, property destruction, online defamation, and the sale of my grandmother's mirror? That was like asking a surgeon to put the scalpel away halfway through a life-saving procedure because the incision felt personal. I didn't answer. An hour later, my father called. "Your mother is falling apart," he said. "This has to stop." I said, "It stops when you stop treating my life like an extension of Vanessa's wants." He exhaled hard. Then, for the first time, fear slipped into his voice. "You don't understand how bad this is getting." I almost laughed. "I understand perfectly," I said. "That's why it's finally working." Still, I agreed to one meeting, but on my terms. Not at their church, not at the house, not at some restaurant where they could perform normalcy. I told Caleb I wanted every relevant file ready, every damage estimate organized, every reimbursement category clear. Then I invited them to my apartment, the cramped one they had once looked down on, the one I had quietly turned into command central. Tessa helped me set the place with almost comic precision. Legal binders on the dining table, printed stills in labeled folders, quotes from contractors, copy of the possession order, spreadsheet of carrying costs, storage, repairs, and replacement values. And yes, Caleb waited in the bedroom until I texted him to come out. I had learned something essential through all this. Surprise is not cruelty when used to stop ongoing theft. Surprise is containment. They arrived on a gray Sunday afternoon. Robert first, looking 10 years older. Elaine behind him, clutching tissues. Vanessa last, sunglasses on indoors, which told me everything about her current state. She took them off, and I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked terrible, but because she looked ordinary. Stripped of the family glow, stripped of the assumption that someone else would absorb the impact. She was just a woman who had made one selfish decision too many and finally reached a wall that would not move. No one hugged me. Good. We sat. The room felt smaller than ever. I let the silence settle until it became uncomfortable enough to be honest. My father started with the usual language: misunderstandings, emotions, family strain. Nobody meant harm. I let him talk until he said, "We all made mistakes." Then I pushed a binder toward him and said, "No, you made choices." I walked them through every one: unauthorized entry, occupancy without permission, damage from unapproved renovations, business registration using my address, sale of my property, public false statements, legal fees, delays in moving, increased insurance risk, storage costs, contractor quotes, replacement values. Each page was a sentence they had thought would never be written. Elaine started crying halfway through. Vanessa interrupted twice, both times to say I was exaggerating, and both times I handed over another document. There is a specific kind of silence that falls when people realize emotion will not erase paper. It's almost holy. Then I called Caleb in. My mother actually gasped. Vanessa muttered, "Unbelievable." Caleb sat, opened his own folder, and explained the options in plain English. Vacate by the deadline, surrender keys, allow inspection, pay agreed damages over time, and cooperate, or face enforcement, expanded civil exposure, and possible referral of specific conduct for further review, depending on what discovery uncovered. My father went pale at the word discovery. Good. Discovery is where family myths go to die under oath. Vanessa tried one last manipulation. She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "You would really do this to your own sister?" For a second, the child in me, the one trained to feel guilty for existing, stirred. Then the adult answered, "No, Vanessa, I'm doing this because you did this to your own sister and expected no consequences." That was the turning point. Not because they apologized. They didn't. Not really. They unraveled. Elaine admitted she had told relatives the house was basically Vanessa's now, because she assumed I would never challenge it. Robert admitted he had used the emergency key because someone had to make a decision. Vanessa admitted she had changed the business mailing address because her lease problems were hurting sales, and my neighborhood looked more stable online. Every confession made them smaller. Every answer made me calmer. By the time they left, no one was pretending we were there to heal. We were there to close a trap. They signed nothing that day, but they had seen the full landscape. And when people finally understand the size of the cliff they are standing near, some of them step back. Some jump anyway. Vanessa, as it turned out, still had one bad choice left in her. The final collapse happened faster than even Caleb predicted. 2 days after the meeting, Grant filed for separation. I know some viewers love revenge stories where the spouse instantly becomes a hero, but that wasn't this. He was not my ally. He was a man who discovered he had moved his children into a legal disaster because his wife and in-laws had lied, and he chose self-preservation. Still, the effect on Vanessa was catastrophic. Without Grant's income and with her business already wobbling from tax issues tied to the address misuse, she could no longer pretend this was just a sibling fight. It was a measurable life failure. My father called 3 times in one day, and when I finally answered, he sounded nothing like the man who had once ordered me to collect my things. "Please," he said, "your mother and I can't cover this." That was when I learned the part they had hidden even from me. In the rush to prop up Vanessa's image, they had drained most of their savings helping with her debts and school tuition for the kids, assuming my house would give her time to recover. They had gambled with everything because they believed I was the safe child, the one who would quietly survive being sacrificed. The sheriff's enforcement date was set for 30 days after the possession order. They were out in 22. Not out gracefully, of course. Vanessa left half-packed resentment in every room. Cheap fixtures where better ones had been removed. Nail holes, broken trim, missing hardware. a cracked tile near the back entry. But she left. The first time I walked back inside after the lock change, I stood in the foyer and just listened. No footsteps that weren't mine. No borrowed laughter. No lie trying to settle into the walls. It smelled like dust, paint, and a very expensive lesson. Caleb's inspector documented everything. We recovered my grandmother's mirror from the buyer, who was kind enough to return it after hearing the story. The built-ins in the study had to be reconstructed. The mantel had gouges from nails Vanessa's decorator had hammered in. The total damages were ugly enough that my parents ended up selling a small lake cabin they'd spent years bragging about to cover part of the settlement. That detail, I'll admit, gave me a very specific kind of peace. As for the public fallout, it didn't come from me ranting online. It came from silence, facts, and the natural spread of consequences. Church friends learned pieces, neighbors learned more. Grant's family learned the rest. Vanessa's boutique lost credibility after customer service issues exposed how unstable things were behind the scenes. My mother stopped posting inspirational quotes about family unity. My father stopped giving advice to anyone, and when one cousin called to say she hoped I wasn't being too hard on them, I answered with the most freeing sentence of my life: "You are welcome to house them in your name." She changed the subject immediately. Funny how fast sympathy dries up when it comes with a mortgage, liability, and repair bills. A month later, Robert and Elaine asked to meet again. I almost refused. Then I realized I wanted one thing: not reconciliation, but clarity. We met in a coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral ground. My mother cried before she sat down. My father looked wrecked. There were no excuses this time, only the thin, stunned grief of people finally staring at what their favoritism had cost. "We thought you'd understand," my mother whispered. "That's the problem," I said. "You always thought I would understand being treated as less." My father tried to say they loved us both. I stopped him. Love without respect is just control wearing softer clothes. Neither of them had an answer to that. They asked whether we could rebuild. I told them the truth. Maybe one day, in small ways, if they learned boundaries and lived them. But they would never again have a key to my home, access to my accounts, or automatic entry to my life. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not restore entitlement. The deeper revenge wasn't that Vanessa lost the house. It wasn't even that her marriage cracked, her image shattered, or my parents had to sell property to pay for the damage. The deeper revenge was this: I was no longer available for the role they wrote for me. I was not the dependable extra in Vanessa's spotlight. I was not the daughter whose competence could be harvested without acknowledgement. I was not the emotional landfill where everyone dumped the cost of keeping the golden child glittering. I took back the house, yes. But more importantly, I took back authorship. I rebuilt the study, restored the trim, rehung the mirror, put a long oak table in the dining room, and invited people who had never once asked me to disappear for someone else's comfort. Tessa laughed when she saw the finished place and said, "Now it actually looks like it belongs to a woman with standards." She was right. So what's the lesson in all of this? It's not "family always comes first." That line has protected a lot of bad behavior. The real lesson is that family is not a lifelong permit to trespass. Not on your home, your finances, your identity, or your peace. Being related to someone does not give them the right to rewrite your labor as their rescue plan, and being the strong one does not mean you were born to absorb injustice quietly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is let consequences arrive unsoftened. Sometimes justice looks like a court order, a locksmith, and a silence that no one in your family can manipulate anymore. If you are the child who is told to be mature, understanding, generous, patient, and low maintenance while someone else was endlessly excused, hear me clearly. Your boundaries are not cruelty. Your records are not pettiness. Your refusal to be used is not bitterness. It is self-respect. And if you've ever been pushed aside so the favorite could keep winning, tell me in the comments, what would have been your breaking point? The key? The lie? Or the party they threw in a house that was never theirs? Thank you for listening. What stands out to me most in this story is that the deepest betrayal was never just about the house. It was about years of disrespect being treated as normal. Diana's victory feels satisfying because she didn't win through cruelty. She won through courage, truth, and boundaries. That makes the story more powerful than ordinary revenge. It shows that protecting your peace is not selfish, and family should never be an excuse for injustice. What would hurt you more? The fact that they took the house, or the fact that they acted like your pain